The man from the extension office didn't even get out of his truck at first. He sat there behind the glass, looking out at the field, and when he finally stepped down onto the cracked earth, he crouched, picked up a handful of soil, let it fall through his fingers, and said 4 words that were meant to end the conversation. "This ground is dead." He handed over the soil report like a verdict. Numbers too low to argue with. pH off. Organic matter practically gone. Nitrogen depleted past the point where most seed companies would even sell to you, because they knew they'd hear about it when the crop failed. The county agent told Harlan Webb to sell the land, take what little he could get, and move on before he spent another year of his life pouring money into something that could no longer give anything back. Harlan didn't say much. He folded the report, put it in his shirt pocket, and watched the man drive back down the gravel lane. That was the last time anyone from the county office set foot on the Webb place. What they didn't know, what nobody knew except a few old men who'd been in that region long enough to remember things people had stopped bothering to remember, was that Harlan hadn't been planning to plant anything from the co-op catalog. He hadn't been planning to call the seed dealer. He hadn't even been thinking about the yield projections the extension office kept pushing. He'd been thinking about a cloth bag in the back of his grandfather's barn. To understand what that bag meant, you have to go back about 60 years. You have to go back to when Harlan's grandfather, a man named Elton Webb, was still farming those same acres with a team of horses and a set of beliefs about land that most of the agricultural world had already decided were outdated. Elton Webb never trusted the hybrid seed revolution the way his neighbors did. He watched them pour into it, watched their yields jump in the early years, and he kept his mouth shut. But he kept something else, too. He kept saving seed the old way, selecting the strongest heads, drying them down slow, storing them in cloth in cool, dark places, from a variety of open-pollinated corn that his own father had brought into that county sometime in the early 1900s. By the time Elton died, almost nobody was saving open-pollinated seed anymore. The hybrid companies had taken over completely. You didn't save seed. You bought new seed every year. And that was just how it was. The neighbors thought Elton's old corn was a relic. They thought it was something you told stories about, not something you planted. The bag sat in the barn for decades. It moved with the property when Elton's son took over, and it stayed when the son passed, and Harlan inherited the place. Harlan had walked past that bag probably 1,000 times without thinking much about it. He wasn't a sentimental man. He wasn't farming out of nostalgia. But the summer before the county agent came and called his soil dead, Harlan had started reading. Not agricultural magazines, not yield reports, old letters. His grandfather's planting journals, the kind of record-keeping that nobody does anymore because it doesn't fit into a spreadsheet. And in those journals, written in a hand that pressed hard into the paper, Elton Webb described that corn in terms that made Harlan set the journal down and stare at the wall. Elton had written about how the corn had come through the dry years, how it had done something that the hybrid corn couldn't do. It had reached deeper, changed its own behavior in response to the soil, produced less in the good years, but held on through the bad ones in a way that the new variety simply didn't. He described the root structure in detail. He described how it responded to thin soil, to low organic matter, to the kind of ground that had been pushed hard for years. He described, almost word for word, the field that the county agent had just written off. What nobody understood yet, what Harlan was only beginning to believe himself, was that the soil wasn't dead, it was depleted. Those two things are not the same. though the Extension Office tends to treat them that way. Dead soil has lost its biology, its microbial life, the invisible system underneath the surface that makes the whole thing work. Depleted soil has been drained of its inputs, its fertility, its easy nutrients. But depleted soil still has structure, it still has potential. And certain varieties of seed, varieties that were bred over generations, not in laboratories but in fields, through decades of natural pressure and selection, those varieties had a relationship with depleted ground that modern hybrids had never needed to develop. Harlan planted that corn in late May on 12 acres of the worst ground on the property. He told no one. There was nothing to announce. He didn't know if it was going to work. He didn't know if the germination rate would even be acceptable after that many years in storage. He prepped the ground as well as he could with the equipment he had, added nothing but a small amount of compost from the cattle pen, and dropped that old seed into soil that the county government had officially classified as not worth farming. The first 2 weeks were almost unbearable to watch. The germination was slow, slower than anything he'd put in the ground before. His neighbor, a man named Dale Puckett, who ran the largest operation in the township, drove by once and looked over the fence and didn't say anything, which was worse than if he had. Dale Puckett ran 1,200 acres of modern seed corn. His fields were uniform and straight and green, and they looked like the future was supposed to look. Harlan's 12 acres looked like a man who hadn't gotten the memo. But by the end of June, something changed. The corn was not uniform. It didn't look like the catalogs. The plants varied in height and spacing in a way that would have alarmed an agronomist, but they were alive in a way that felt different. The color was dark, almost blue-green in certain light. The root structures where Harlan dug carefully, alongside a few plants to check, ran deep, far deeper than he expected, reaching down past the depleted top layer into subsoil moisture that the surface had lost. The plants were not performing the way modern corn performs. They were doing something older than performance. They were surviving and slowly, quietly, pulling the ground back toward something. By mid-July, Harlan started to believe. By August, when even Dale Puckett had slowed his truck down when he drove past. The dry stretch that hit that county in late July and the first 2 weeks of August was the kind of dry stretch that costs people their season. It wasn't a disaster. It was the steady, grinding kind of dry. 10 days without rain, then 5 days, then 8 more. The kind that doesn't make the news, but quietly takes the yield projections and cuts them in half. Dale Puckett's corn went into stress. The hybrids across the county went into stress. Everybody was watching the sky and doing math and coming up short. Harlan's 12 acres didn't go into stress. They didn't explode. They didn't perform miracles, but they held. The plants that had rooted deep pulled moisture from a level of the soil that the shallow-rooted hybrids couldn't reach. The variety that had been selected through drought years and thin years, and years when a farmer had nothing extra to give, it remembered what those conditions asked for. The biology encoded in that seed across a century of selection knew something the laboratory had never needed to teach it. When Harlan combined those 12 acres in October, he didn't set a yield record. He never claimed to. The county agent's numbers said the ground shouldn't have produced anything worth harvesting. What came off those 12 acres was modest by modern standards, but it came off ground that had been written off completely, and it came off clean, with no purchased inputs beyond a wheelbarrow of compost, and it came off during a summer that had reduced yields across the rest of the county by 30% or more. The thing that settled in quietly, the thing that Harlan felt more than he spoke about, was not the yield number. It was the soil test he ran in November on those same 12 acres. The organic matter had moved, not dramatically, not enough to impress anyone at a conference, but it had moved in the right direction, upward, on ground that the county report had said was at a terminal point. The root mass left behind after the harvest was decomposing into biology. The ground was doing something it hadn't done in years. It was beginning, slowly, to heal itself. Harlan saved the best seed heads from that harvest. He dried them down slow, the way his grandfather's journals described. He put them in cloth in a cool, dark place, the same way the old man had done it 60 years before. Next spring, he planned to plant 24 acres. Dale Puckett asked him about it once. At the feed store, in the flat, casual way that men in farming country ask questions they've been thinking about for a while. Harlan told him what he knew. He didn't dress it up. He didn't claim to have discovered anything. He just said that his grandfather had understood something about that ground and had been patient enough to preserve it, and that he'd been lucky enough to find the journal before he lost the seed. Puckett nodded, didn't say much, but the next spring he asked Harlan for a small amount of seed to trial on one of his weaker fields. The county agent never came back out to the Webb place. He didn't need to. His report was still on file, still official, still said what it said. But the ground didn't care what the report said. It never does. That is the quiet truth about soil that's been farmed hard and written off and left behind by the systems that claim to improve it. It still remembers what it was. It still carries, deep in its biology and its mineral structure, the potential to become something again if you give it the right relationship with seed that was shaped by the same kind of struggle. The county agent saw numbers on a page and called it finished. Harlan Webb found a cloth bag in a dark barn and called it a beginning. One of them was right, and it wasn't the man with the report,